Hello, and welcome to another episode on Peter Herman Adventures. If you clicked on this video, you're probably a little bit curious about centerpin fishing and what it entails, what it's all about. So, without further ado, I'm just going to explain a little bit about what centerpin fishing is all about. So this is a centerpin reel. It's actually a very simple mechanism. All it is either a bushing or a bearing in the middle and a spool. And on the back side there's a clicker. Now the clicker, all it does is when you turn that over, it keeps the reel from free spooling. It kind of slows it down a bit. It is not a drag system. All it does is it keeps your reel from winding on its own and making a mess when you're walking around or when you're tying up or whenever you're not fishing. You put that clicker on. Otherwise, any little bump will make that reel free spool. So this is a Lure Jensen Legacy reel, and this one costs about, I forget, it's roughly $250 or so, and that's kind of mid-range for centerpin reels. Certainly some are cheaper and most of them are more expensive. The most popular ones around here are like the Milners and the Islander reels, and those are all kind of in the $500 or $600 range, some even more. Now, it being such a simple reel, a really simplistic machine, you might wonder how come they cost so much. I think that it's mostly to do with the size of the production runs. These are not one of the more popular reels in the world. So when you set up machines in a factory to produce one of these things, you might only sell, I don't know how many they sell, but let's say that they sell 5,000 reels, where if they set up a factory for producing a spinning reel, they'll sell 500,000. So all that setup cost, I think, is what drives the price of these things. Otherwise, they're not really complicated to make. So what is it that makes these centerpin reels so great? On the river that I fish, the Vedder River in Chilliwack, these are probably the most popular reel among experienced anglers. I'm not putting down any other reels or anything. Like, often I float fish with just a regular spinning reel. Sometimes I float fish with a bait casting reel. Some people call that a level wind. But more and more I find myself fishing centerpin. I started fishing centerpin about a year and a half ago or so. And the more I fish it, the more I like it. So what is it good at? Well, the main thing with a centerpin reel is that out of all the reel types, it allows for the best line control. So when your float is going down river, the surface water is moving a bit faster than the bottom water. So the bottom water is being slowed down by drag from all the rocks. And if you just let your float run down the river at the speed of the surface water, what's happening is your lead is dragging the presentation through the water. So as that float is going down river, this is your lead, and it's actually dragging your presentation. So the first thing that the fish sees is this going by, a swivel and a piece of lead and some line, and then it sees your presentation. And a fish that's been in the river for a little while, that's a little bit gear shy, is not going to bite that. So ideally what you want to be doing is you want to be slowing your float down just a little bit as it's going down river, and that way the fish sees your presentation first and your line second. It's called trotting your float, and trotting your float is probably easiest with a centerpin reel, because with your fingers you can slow that line down just right. You get really fine control over how much you slow your line down. You can slow it down a little bit, or you can slow it down a little bit more. You get really fine control over what your line is doing. The other thing that's really nice about centerpin fishing is there is no drag. Your drag is your fingers on the reel. So when you're fighting a fish, you tend to, in the end, like once you learn how to do it, once you get good at it, you actually lose far fewer fish. There isn't ever that moment where you're fiddling with your drag and trying to get more drag, or where your drag is set too tight. You get infinite variable drag just with your fingers. So once you get used to it, you end up losing fewer fish, and you don't have to mess with the drag trying to figure out just the right setting for different kinds of leaders and this and that. The drawback with a center pin really, I think, comes down to the difficulty of use. A reel like this, like, I consider myself a fairly dexterous person, and the first time I tried to learn, I actually gave up. After like a month, I'm like, no, this is too hard. I'm messing with my line too much. I'm losing out on fishing time. It's just not worth it. And I traded my center pin for a level wind. And then a couple years later, I'm like, well, maybe I gave up too soon. I gave it another try. I invested the time, and you know, I would say it takes maybe like 100 hours of casting before it starts to be easy. So it's the kind of thing where investing a little bit of time is necessary. The other thing that is not the best about these reels is the retrieve. So it's a 1-to-1 ratio, and if you're doing long drifts or long casts, it takes quite a bit of time to reel in. So if you're fishing with a level wind reel, you know, it's like a 3-to-1 ratio there, and you can wind in a heck of a lot faster, which theoretically results in more drifts. So what you're going with a center pin reel is probably quality over quantity. So hopefully you found this a little bit helpful. Thanks for watching. See you next time.